Hey guys, welcome back to Acts 2 and 42. Thanks for watching this video. What I'd like to do in this video is walk you guys through and try to point you guys to the direction of what I think the true Sabbath is, what I think the scriptures prepared us for, the scriptures allow us to understand. And the way we want to do that is we're going to start all the way in the beginning and deal with it from creation, the seventh day when God rested. From there, we're going to look at the patriarchs and the early believers before the law of Moses. And then obviously next, we're going to go to the law of Moses. And from there, kind of a post-Christ, a church view, a Christian view, a spiritual understanding of what the Sabbath really is. So I have a ton of slides, a ton of graphics here to help not only give you the quotations, biblical and extra biblical quotations, but also graphics that hopefully help you see what it is I'm saying. So let me know in the comments if this is helpful. I hope you enjoy this, and let's get to it. So right before we begin, kind of as an introduction or to preface this, I want to go to Hebrews 10 and 1 and point out that the Christian knows that the law had a shadow of good things to come, but it was not the very image of the things. So I always use the example of like Jesus Christ, right? When he comes, John the Baptist calls him the Lamb of God. And we know that he died. He died on the Passover, right? So he was essentially the Passover lamb. But what God did, knowing that we are earthly creatures, we're earthly people, we have earthly minds, and we have to see physical, natural, carnal things to understand them. He gave them to us naturally first. He gave them to the world, to his people, naturally first. So he gave a real lamb. So when Jesus came and died, this is how the Jewish people understood what his death signified. So the real lamb is a shadow, but Christ, being the spiritual lamb, was the very image of what God wanted to point to, right? So next I want to go to an early Christian. So all these early Christians that I'm quoting are pre-Roman Catholic Church. These are not Roman Catholic Christians, just to point that out. I don't want you to think it's Catholic history, but just early Christians as in second and third generation believers away from the apostles. So here Novation says, therefore first, all of us, we must avail ourselves of that passage, that the law is spiritual, Romans 7:14. And if they deny it to be spiritual, they assuredly blaspheme. So if you say the law is not spiritual, you blaspheme, right? If they confess it to be spiritual, then let them read it spiritually. For divine things must be divinely received and must assuredly be maintained as holy. But a grave fault is branded on those who attach earthly and human doctrine to sacred and spiritual words, and this we must beware of doing. So what is he saying here? He's basically saying that if we all believe, as Romans 7:14 says, as Paul the apostle wrote, that the law is spiritual, then when we read it, we must try to understand what it spiritually means, what it spiritually references, not just the earthly meaning, okay? But before we get spiritual, let's go natural. Let's go right to creation, the seventh day of rest. In Genesis, the second chapter, the first to the third verse, it says that on the seventh day, God ended his work and he rested, right? It's a very basic, simple concept. We all understand it. He blessed the seventh day and he sanctified it. Sanctify has several definitions, but it basically means to separate it, and it implies holiness. You separate it for a holy purpose. And he did this because that was the day that he rested from all natural work, which he created, okay? So here's the graphics that I have, right? And this is the beginning. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of unfold it piece by piece. But if we looked at the biblical ages, right, starting all the way back, which Ursher's timeline, his dating system, according to our calendar, dates back creation around 4004 BC, right? We had the birth of Christ, arguably between 4 BC and 4 AD, give or take. And all the way on the right, we see you are here in 2018 when this was made, but it's actually 2019 while the video is being made. So you'll notice in the bottom left-hand corner of the timeline where creation is, we have a little finger in the hand that's representing the days of creation, right? And we have, zoom in a little bit, we have the work was done. You'll see the work was done in the first 6 days. the seventh day was rest. And the reason why I kind of blocked off the seventh and the eighth day is because they mean something important, okay? So the 6 days was work. The seventh day he rested. Now on the eighth day, what would have been the eighth day of creation, the eighth day of time, right? That's where we have the beginning of a new day, or the first day of a new week. I don't think it's argued in Christianity today that the number 8 represents a new beginning. And we see the first example of that all the way in creation at the beginning of time, where 8 was actually the first day of the second week, or the first day of a new week, right? Now, just to give you a little reference, there was about 2,500 years, okay? About 25 generations of people, grandfathers and great-grandfathers and so forth, and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren between Adam, or the creation of mankind, right? And when the law was introduced through Moses. So this block of time, this is a pretty big chunk, okay? It's like it's more than a third of what we have on our timeline here. This is a large span of time that is pretty interesting. And the reason I say that is because I would call this the first faith. I would call this, the patriarchs, the first people that followed God that were righteous. Noah, good example. Enoch, great example. That the church fathers called the most holy prophet, Enoch. Abraham, how about Abraham, right? The father of our faith, okay? So this is where we get some of the best examples, right? And this is before the law. And I would argue, as many Christians do, that Christ reconciled us back to the first faith. Before the law was needed, and we'll get into that. We are brought to a more pure faith through Christ, which was the faith that the early fathers first had, okay? And we'll get into that in a second. So let's get a quote from another early Christian, Tertullian. It says, "In fine, let him who contends that the Sabbath is still to be observed as a balm of salvation and circumcision on the 8th day because of the threat of death, teach us that for time past righteous men kept the Sabbath or practiced circumcision and were thus rendered friends of God." So what he's saying here is, if you contend that the observance of the Sabbath, I think I'm gonna have a hard time with constantly saying observance. I can't, for some reason I can't say it properly, so forgive me. But if you say that we have to keep the Sabbath for salvation and circumcision, the law of Moses, and all these things, so then give us the example of these righteous men before the law, that they did these things, and because of that they were called friends of God. Hebrews 11:2 says, "For by it," meaning faith, "the elders obtained a good report." And it lists Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, his wife Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and Moses, to name those that pleased God before the law. Even Moses pleased God before the law, obeying God, having faith in God before he was given the law. These are the pillars, right? These are some of our pillars here. And notice all of these please God, were righteous men, are our elders in the faith and most holy examples that we have, right? And they were such without a law. All of this time, Abraham living around 2000 BC, but 2,500 years of the most holy, righteous men had no law. Tertullian says again, "Therefore, since God originated Adam, uncircumcised, inobservant of the Sabbath, consequently his offspring also, Abel, offering sacrifices, uncircumcised and inobservant of the Sabbath, was by him commended. Noah also, uncircumcised, yes, and inobservant of the Sabbath, God freed from the deluge," meaning flood. "For Enoch too, the most righteous man, uncircumcised and inobservant of the Sabbath, he translated from this world, who did not first taste death, in order that, being a candidate for eternal life, show us that we may also, without the burden of the law of Moses, please God." So again, Tertullian, an early Christian who wrote volumes and volumes and volumes of apologetics, defending the faith from the heathen and the Jews alike, that argued against the Christian faith at that time. He makes a case, and he makes it clear by several righteous examples. These men were uncircumcised, had not been given the commandment or the covenant of circumcision, and were not commanded to obey the Sabbath. yet all of these righteous things in ways that they please God without the law of Moses. So keep in mind that we have 2,500 years and 25 plus generations of people pleasing God, living with God, loving God, friends of God, righteous men, wonderful miracles, salvation, all of these things taking place for them. And they had no law. They didn't observe a Sabbath. They didn't do any of this. The only thing that we have up until this point is that God himself did no work on the seventh day of creation. Okay? And it's not until the law, as we'll see, how it came forth that man was to not work on the Sabbath. So let's go to the law of Moses and let's talk a little bit about what it was and why. That's Exodus 20 verses 8 through 11. It says, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath unto the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor maidservant, the cattle, no one. No one's doing any work. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and hallowed it, or sanctified it, made it holy, right? So let's get into why the law has now made an example for man to follow, to observe the Sabbath the way the Lord did. So why? What's the why here? Why did that come forward? Galatians 3:18 through 19 tells us why the law was given. Paul says, for if the inheritance be of the law, it is no more the promise. But God gave it to Abraham by promise. Wherefore then serveth the law. So why do you serve the law if it was given by promise? It, meaning the law was added because of transgression. So it was added because of sin, until the seed should come, to whom the promise was made, speaking of Christ. But before faith came, we were under the law, shut up under the faith which should afterwards be revealed. So it says, if the inheritance promised to Abraham doesn't come by serving the law, then why serve it? Then why follow the law? It was added because of transgression, right? Because people were sinning until Christ should come. So it's really, really clear, until Christ should come. So now the promise is made to his seed before the law, and it's inherited through his seed after the law. These are 2 points in time that they share in common, that the law was not necessary. The law had a space from 1491 BC until Christ came, okay? It served its purpose in its time, but now we're back to receiving it the same way Abraham did, which was through faith. So the law essentially reigned for 1,500 years. It had this span of time that was about 1,500 years until Christ came, that it served its purpose, and it was an example to keep people until he came. And it was clear to continue further in Galatians. It says, wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. So the purpose was that it would be like a teacher that would guide mankind, or guide God's people, until Christ would come, and then we would be justified by faith. But after that faith has come, we are no longer under the schoolmaster, for ye are children of God by faith in Christ Jesus. So now there's no longer need for the teacher, the schoolmaster, the law. We don't need the example. We don't need the shadow of good things to come. We have the very image. John Calvin says here, thus the law is a kind of mirror. And I love this quote. As in a mirror, we discover any stains upon our face. So the law we behold first, our impotence. Then, in consequence of it, our iniquity. And finally, the curse, as the consequences of both. To this effect is the apostle's declaration that by the law is the knowledge of sin. Romans 3:20. So he's breaking down what Paul was saying in Romans 3:20, in that we are saved from the condemnation of the law, right? And I don't want this video to be solely about, saved by the law or saved by works, saved by grace, but it is definitely relevant to a point. So the law gave us example. It showed those in sin. It shows the transgressor the error of his ways. And with the law came the curse. With the law came the consequences, right? So we were first able to see our impotence, our weakness, our inability to be righteous. So that shows us our iniquity, where we fell short. And then finally the curse of the consequence, right? So now partnering this quote based on Romans 3, consider Romans 7 that the law is spiritual, right? And Hebrews 10 that the law was a shadow of something good that was to come. Let's go to Jeremiah 31. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, I will make a new covenant. A covenant is an agreement. Just for anyone that doesn't understand that, it's an agreement, it's a contract, it's a covenant or testament, okay? He said, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break. Although I was a husband unto them, saith the Lord, but this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law into their inward parts, and I will write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. Okay, so this was prophesied during the period that the law was being observed, during that 1500-year period we talked about after Moses, before Christ, by Jeremiah the prophet. So he makes it really, really clear that he's going to make a new covenant, not according to the first covenant, okay? And that's very, very clear in Hebrews. I love the book of Hebrews because it breaks all this down. It makes it very, very plain. And I don't understand how people still don't get it today. I really don't. That's honest. I'm not throwing a shade. It's just honest. I don't understand it because it's pretty simple. So it's not according to that covenant, right? And there's a good reason for that. They broke that covenant. They would not keep it. They could not keep it, okay? So he's going to put the law in their hearts. After this is fulfilled, we see this in Hebrews 8:13. In that he saith, the new covenant, he had made the first one old. Now that which it decayeth and waxeth old is ready to vanish away. So one covenant replaces the other. They don't exist side by side. God doesn't have two covenants with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, right? He has one covenant, and he's disannulled the first to give them a new one. Now let's also consider Colossians 2. Paul says here, let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of an holy day or of a new moon or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. So here we have Paul saying that these are a shadow of things to come. What were we told? That was a shadow of good things to come. The things pertaining to the law, the things found within the law, were a shadow, but not the very thing. So back to Colossians 2. Let no man therefore judge you. And some people interpret this a very strange way. I find it strange, but don't let anyone judge you if you want to keep the Sabbath. That's not what he's saying here, because he's saying these things are irrelevant. These things do not matter because they are a shadow of things to come. The body is of Christ, okay? So there's no one going around saying, oh, you want to keep the Sabbath? Oh, you want to keep the Sabbath? Why are you keeping the Sabbath? It was actually quite the opposite. I think Acts the 15th chapter is a good example of conflicts they had in the church where some Jews would insist on keeping the law, the circumcision and the law according to Moses, as pertaining to salvation. So this was Jews that were telling Christians that they had to, especially Gentiles. And in Acts the 15th chapter, it was said and it was agreed upon by the elders in Jerusalem with Paul that the Gentiles only had to abstain from meat sacrificed to idols and strangled with blood in it and from fornication. So they didn't have to worry about these other practices. These weren't for them. And Paul wrote about this extensively. It's why we're reading this in Colossians. It's why we read it in Galatians, because there were Jews that continued to contend that you had to keep the law and all the things found within the law, like meats and drinks and holy days, the feast of Israel and the new moons and the Sabbath days. Don't let anyone judge you according to these things. These things are not what make you saved. These things are not what define you as a believer. The body is of Christ. These things were just a shadow of things to come. Like we originally saw in Hebrews, a shadow, not the very image. Novation says, again, that the law is spiritual. We have to understand it spiritually. What do these things pertain to? What is the Sabbath day? What was the seventh day? The thing that was in the beginning was in the 7 days of creation when God took his rest. What did he give an example of? When the schoolmaster, when the teacher came, what example were we to learn from this schoolmaster until Christ came? What is the spiritual thing? Because it's not the seventh day of the week. Hebrews, the 3rd chapter says, "Wherefore, as the Holy Ghost saith, today if you hear my voice, harden not your hearts, as in the day of provocation, in the day of temptation in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest." Okay? He says, "Take heed, brethren, lest there be any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God, but exhort one another daily, while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. For we are made partakers of Christ, if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast." Confidence is another way of saying faith, steadfast until the end. "While it is said, today, if you hear my voice, harden not your hearts, as in the provocation. For some, when they heard it, did provoke. Howbeit, not all that came out of Egypt by Moses, but with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not with them that sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness? They died, the Jews that stumbled through unbelief died and did not enter the promised land." So he's saying, don't make the same mistake as them. "And to whom sware he that they should not enter his rest, but to them that believe not." So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. They could not enter into his rest because of unbelief. "Let us therefore fear, lest the promise being left us of entering into rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. For unto us was the gospel preached, as well as unto them. But the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. For we which have believed do enter into rest, as he said, As I have sworn in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. For he spoke in a certain place of the seventh day on the wise, and God did rest on the seventh day from all his works. And in this place again, if they shall enter into my rest. Seeing therefore it remaineth that some must enter therein, and they to whom it was first preached enter not in because of unbelief. Again, he limiteth a certain day, saying in David, today, after so long a time, as it said, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts. So this is a great example on how it's beneficial to read from multiple Bibles, because I'm pretty sure that everything we just read was pretty difficult to follow. So what I'm going to do, not that I'm an advocate for the New Living Translation exactly, but it is more paraphrased and more modern day language. So let me read from it, the section I just read, to see if it makes better sense for you. I'm going to start at Hebrews 4:3. It says, "For only we who believe can enter his rest. As for the others, God says, in my anger I took an oath, they will never enter my rest, even though this rest has been since he made the world." We know it is ready because of the place in scriptures where he mentions the seventh day. On the seventh day, God rested from all his works. But in the other passage, God said, they will never enter my rest. So God's rest is there for people to enter. But those who first heard this good news failed to enter because they disobeyed God. So God set another time for entering his rest, and that time is today. God announced this through David much later in the words already quoted. Today, when you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. Now, if Joshua has succeeded in giving them this rest, God would not have spoken about another day of rest still to come. So there is a special rest still waiting for the people of God. For all who have entered into God's rest have rested from their labors, just as God did after creating the world. So let us do our best to enter that rest. But if we disobey God, as the people of Israel did, we will fall. If when they entered in with Joshua, that was the rest he spoke of, it says, then he would not have afterwards have spoken of another day. So after the predecessor of Moses, Joshua, helped them obtain the promised land, right? After that to David, he said, today. And after that, we hear again, today, if you will hear my voice, right? So he still speaks of another day of entering into rest. The same example of God working 6 days and him taking a day of rest is what he's basically given the people of God. And it says here, there remaineth therefore a rest to the people of God. There's a day coming when the people of God shall rest from all their works, just as God did. This is what we're reading out of Hebrews. And it says, so let us labor. So let us work until then. And not only work, but work to strive to enter into that rest. So now, if this day of rest is to come, it's not the Sabbath day as in the seventh day of the week. It's not the seventh day just in creation, but there's a day to come, which spiritually is the seventh day, the rest that we shall enter in. So what is the very image of the thing? what is the very image? What is the true Sabbath?